Chapter 3. The Crisis of Crisis Giving. Emergency! Help! SOS! This is a faith ministry, and if you don't send cash now, we're going under. We've all heard these emergency requests for money coming from our televisions, radios, mailboxes, and to a lesser degree our churches. I suppose there are real emergencies that require prompt giving. But the frantic requests we usually receive aren't because of a tsunami, an earthquake, or famine. On the contrary, our emergency solicitations are frequently to pay routine bills. It's well known in marketing that sex sells. Want to sell a car, some toothpaste, a gallon of milk? Breasts, thighs, and a nice behind will work every time. Similarly, in the church, it's well known that crises sell. Some ministries are sustained, and some even thrive on crisis giving. Christians should ask two questions when presented with a crisis request. First, is the crisis real? Often preachers exaggerate to get us to give more and to give quicker. Take your hand off your wallet, step away from the ATM, and study the situation before giving. Who's making the request? Is the minister known for moderate living and sacrificial giving? Or is he known for his collection of homes, cars, and expensive suits? Really now, if the situation is as bad as the preacher says it is, and if he believes in it half as much as he wants us to believe in it, shouldn't he set the example by parting with his stuff and giving sacrificially? How can we take the emergency request seriously when the preacher isn't moved enough by his own words to sacrifice? The minister must sacrifice before asking others to do so. Anything less than this is hypocrisy. Now let's qualify the sacrifice. King David once said, quote, "Nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which costs me nothing." End of quote. 1 Samuel 24:24. A sacrifice is not really a sacrifice if it costs you nothing. Therefore, the preacher's sacrifice must proportionately cost him as much as it costs the poorest giver. But since he is a church leader, he should sacrifice far more than those whom he solicits. Leaders are judged more strictly than those whom they lead. That's in James 3:1. They must set the example. If the preacher gives $1,000 towards the so-called crisis and has a bunch of money left over, he hasn't really sacrificed anything. He's simply given a routine gift, a gift that may be subtly returned to him through the ministry in 100 different ways. Christians should never feel obligated to give proportionately more towards the crisis than the person who asked them to give. Second, why is there a crisis? Is this a natural or man-made crisis? A natural crisis is one of those serious human emergencies that intrude upon the normalcy of life's routine. For instance, if a single mom loses her job and has no means to support her family, this is a natural crisis. The church should sacrifice if necessary to provide financial support. A man-made crisis, however, is a purported grave situation that is more the result of the preacher than the situation. Let's review this list of preacher-induced possibilities. 1. The preacher's sense of perspective. 2. The preacher's sense of timing. 3. The preacher's sense of expenses. 4. The preacher's sense of aloneness. 5. The preacher's sense of privilege. The preacher's sense of perspective. A preacher's perspective can cause a financial crisis. Here in Atlanta, there are a few megachurches with the perspective that Jesus can't come back until the church takes over the world. The perspective is generally referred to as kingdom now theology. This false doctrine is especially useful to worldly, materialistic, and spiritually blind preachers because it serves as the foundation upon which they justify their ungodly ambitions of greatness. If Jesus can't return until the church takes over the world, then the church must take over the world. And what does this mean in practical terms? It means kingdom now people must infiltrate and rise to the top of every conceivable level of business and society. This must be done individually and corporately. It's the corporate efforts of the church that may be presented as crises. Give, give, give. We must build this auditorium, this radio station, this television station, this mega complex, this school, this college, this university, etc. We absolutely must build this bank or a credit union. Give, give, give. It takes money to build our own communities and simultaneously take over the world. Unfortunately, gullible Christians who aren't students of church history don't know that we have already done what they are ignorantly trying to accomplish. We have a 1,000-year plus example of religious rule. It's called the Catholic Church. For more than 1,000 years, it directly or indirectly controlled every facet of Western society: the arts, the sciences, the military, the government. What did this produce? Heaven on earth? The second coming of Christ? Nope. It caused what is commonly referred to as the Dark Ages. It brought about stifling civil oppression, horrific religious wars, and several church-sponsored campaigns of terror against innocent civilians. If history tells us anything, it tells us this: the last thing this world needs is to be controlled by the church. Requests for money to resurrect this disaster do not qualify as a crisis. The preacher's sense of timing. Preachers often cause crises by their sense of timing. They want what they want, and they want it now. They want their own building now. They want a bigger building now. They want a radio or television ministry now. They want to expand their radio and television ministry now. They want. The list could go on indefinitely. The point is, preachers often create crises by impatiently and often insensitively demanding what they want now. The preacher's sense of expenses. Many preachers create crises by spending funds like they own their own money farm. The reasoning seems to be, quote, we can afford it, so let's go for it, end of quote. What the preacher means by we can afford it is he can raise the money. The project could be done at the lesser price of X, but the higher price of Y is chosen because the excess amount can be raised. There is no overwhelming reason why the higher priced project is chosen other than the preacher wants it this way. This request for funds absolutely does not qualify as a crisis. The preacher's sense of aloneness. Some preachers create crises because they see themselves as God's only true servants. In 1 Kings 19 chapter, verses 1 through 18, the prophet Elijah told God that he was the only one in Israel who was still faithfully serving him. God answered, quote, "Yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal," that was the false god, "and every mouth that has not kissed him," end of quote. What happens when a preacher sees himself as the only true servant of God? Inevitably, he takes upon himself a burden too heavy for any one man to carry. His sense of self-importance grows beyond reality. Frequently, this burden and exaggerated ego cost a lot of money to manage. Count the large number of Christian television programs on Sunday morning. Notice the striking similarity of content. Nonetheless, the preacher who sees himself as God's last faithful servant feels compelled to join the crowd and preach the, quote, true, end of quote, gospel. In too many cases, however, the preacher only duplicates the ministry of others. A request for funds to support such a ministry certainly doesn't rise to the level of a financial crisis. The preacher's sense of privilege. There is a group of preachers that has a tremendous sense of material privilege. Fortunately, its activities are usually limited to independent, non denominational, and generally unaccountable ministries, those with weak or easily manipulated boards. These preachers create financial crises by demanding to be treated as CEOs, sole proprietor business owners, or Protestant popes. The church is there to enrich them and their inner circle, so they believe. This results in exorbitant salaries and hidden financial benefits that drain the church and puts it in permanent emergency fundraising mode. It's easy to assume this is primarily the practice of megachurches and other large ministries. Yet this also describes multitudes of smaller ministries. It's not unusual for a small church of 25, 50, 100, or 200 to pay its pastors salaries and benefits that far exceed the boundaries of integrity or even common sense. My wife's friend just shared that her pastor quit his secular job so he can work full time for the 25-member church. Now, one of my highly placed unpaid spies told me that this preacher is kicking butts in that little church to get his tithe money. It's a shame and a sin that so much time, manipulation, and threats are used on Sunday morning raising money that is destined for some preacher's pocket or to build another unnecessary building. This also does not qualify as a true crisis. True crisis giving. There are certainly good preachers and ministries that deserve our financial assistance in furthering the gospel. Some of them may present problems or opportunities that require urgent action. You may support such a cause in the name of Christ, or you may refuse to support it in the name of Christ. It's a matter of conscience, what each person feels the Lord is telling him or her. There is, however, a category of giving that absolutely requires us to give. This category is human need. Human need is not the same as organizational need. Organizations are creations of people. People are creations of God. We're not obligated to support organizations, but we are obligated to support people. On Judgment Day, we will be judged on how we treated people, not organizations. A clear example of this is in Matthew 25th chapter, the 31st through the 40th verses. And I'm going to read that for you. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep up on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Now, notice that we will not be commended or condemned for how we treated religious organizations. The issue on Judgment Day will be our conduct towards people. This is no small difference of opinion. True crisis giving is when we see individuals in genuine need and we materially meet those needs. In Jesus' example above, it is clear that God considers genuine need as the essentials of life as well as general acts of compassion: food, water, clothes, shelter, visitation, things of that sort. When we help people in need, we help Jesus. When we ignore people in need, we ignore Jesus. Therefore, the only options we have when we see a person in genuine need is to help. This is consistent with commands such as 1 John 3:17, and I quote, "But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." Now, when we give the way God instructed us to give, we further the kingdom of God in the most effective and efficient way. And there are at least 6 ways this is done. 6 benefits of giving directly to the person in need. First, the Christian who sees a human need and personally meets it powerfully demonstrates the reality of God's love to the recipient. Second, the gift creates a Jesus bond between the giver and the recipient. This bond strengthens or creates godly relationships. These relationships can lead to sinners coming to Christ or Christians growing in the faith. Third, there are many more Christians than there are churches. Individual Christians are virtually everywhere there are people in need. They interact with them daily. Christians are already strategically positioned by God to meet their needs in His name. Thus, needs can be met without administrative costs whenever they decide to help people. Fourth, the giver directly participates in the redemption of humanity. This provides the giver the joy of hearing and obeying God and of experiencing the spiritual ecstasy of witnessing what God can do through the least of us, something that is diminished when we settle for partnership with organizations instead of with the Holy Spirit. Fifth, direct giving to the person in need assures that the money gets to the person. This is a critical point. The vast majority of money given to churches and other religious organizations is not directly spent on human need or preaching the gospel. It is spent on salaries, benefits, buildings, and administration. Sixth, giving directly to the person in need as God commanded. It's common sense. It's foolish to respond to human need all around us by giving money to a preacher and then hoping something is done about the need. Why not just give to the person? This would meet the need quicker and satisfy the demands of common sense. There are several reasons why we violate common sense to give to preachers and organizations instead of people. We'll discuss them later. An example of true crisis giving. A traveler was beaten, robbed, and left to die on the side of the road. Religious leaders saw the man and ignored the need. Perhaps they reasoned that they had already given to the church or that they would later give to the church. Later, a stranger helped the man by directly taking care of his needs. He didn't send money to an organization and hope the money would somehow find its way back to the man. God condemned the actions of the religious leaders and commended the man who took care of the need. That's in Luke 10th chapter, the 25th through the 37th verse. Now, had the stranger been broke, he would have been justified to send out emergency requests for funds. Immediate human need requires extreme action in the shortest period of time, even if it requires us to ask others to help us meet that need. A good thing to remember, however, about emergency appeals for money is that immediate sacrificial giving is normally only proper when it is directly related to human need. In this case, it's best to send the money directly to the person in need without going through a religious middleman. If you find it impossible to do so without a third party, diligently examine its financial dealings. If its financial records are unavailable or its financial practices are questionable, find a ministry that can be trusted and use it as an intermediary.